And for those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Jack Kruse. I'm a neurosurgeon. I'm in private practice. Probably my, I guess that's what I would consider my day job. My passion is I'm a quantum biologist. And this change happened to me about 12 years ago. And last year when I came to this event, my topic was photosynthesis and food. And basically to tell you that everything you believe about food is a falsehood because it's all tied to photosynthesis. And if you don't know anything about light, you don't know anything about food. And this talk is the flip side of that talk. In other words, there's a coupled pathway, and I got kind of famous on the internet for making something called the leptin prescription. So what I decided to do is give you a story about actually how I figured this out piece by piece, okay? And before I start, I wanna say thank you to Dave. He invited me last year. I was kind of shocked that he invited me to a food forward group, especially with my perspective, because my perspective is decidedly not food, it's decidedly towards light. I mean, food has its place, and you'll probably hear me talk a little bit about that, but I wanna tell you that gratitude is important for this reason. And I think when I get done, you'll understand why. Because it raises our dopamine level. And you heard me say something last night in Unbound, which brings me to this group of characters, or misfits as I like to call them. The answers are right in front of us, folks. And you heard me say it in the movie, but you may not know why I said it, because even though the answers are right in front of us, if your dopamine level is low, you will not perceive the truth right in front of your face, okay? And one of the cool things that you're gonna learn in the talk is that the best and fastest way to raise your dopamine level is through AM sunlight. And I'm gonna show you how. But I don't want you to think that that's not all of them. These guys up here, you know Ben, this is Jeremy. For those of you who don't know him, Ben made a movie about him. This picture was taken in New Orleans, and the four guys on this slide are gonna do something really important in this life. Some people think we've already done it. My opinion is we're only scratching the surface. There's a lot more to come. When you get us four together in the French Quarter, we raise our dopamine levels in a big way, in many different ways. And the point is that friends, family is incredibly important. Somebody asked a question to Ruben a little earlier about, do you trim your friends? Ruben wasn't being honest with you at all. Ruben got off social media last year for a variety of different reasons, but one of the main reasons is social media is a place where a lot of energy vampires they hang out and they look to take you down. I have a famous Instagram quote. If you haven't followed me on Instagram, you may like some of them, but there's 7.5 billion people on the planet and I only like 6 of them, and I always rotate them through. So I'm looking to steal electrons from people all the time. And it's uncanny to me that no matter where I go, I always meet people who are new and I get to entangle with them, and they don't really know what I'm doing until they actually hear me talk about the stuff I talk about. This is one of those cats. His name's Devin. He's here. You've probably seen him. His mom's here. I just met his mom for the first time. I met Devin at a biohacking event in 2014, and to be quite honest with you, one of my biases, I thought millennials were low dopamine generation. And he was the first one that changed my opinion. I did a talk there that was very controversial. And let's put it this way. I had a 12.5-hour Q&A that didn't end until 3:30 in the morning across the street, and Devin stayed for the whole thing. And since then, he's been a member of my site because he understood that the key wasn't buying boxes and supplements and worrying about different types of foods when you were getting the key fixture wrong, which was light. And you can see, he bought all the books and he started to learn. Last guy is the latest millennial, and he's 17 years old. He's here. You probably saw him with his long blonde hair. That's Matt. And Matt came to my members event. Matt's not a member because he's broke. He has no money. So he wrote a blog called Quantum Thievery, and he met my wife, he met all my members. He broke into this 5-star resort and basically spent almost 2 weeks with us. He did it with his buddy Brian, who's sitting right here in the front. Matt's right there. And the key thing is, because he took a risk, he didn't know if he was gonna meet me. Turns out I went down there 2 days early with my wife, sat on the beach, these two clowns showed up, and guess what we did? For 2 days, they got an educational consult for 48 hours. And then they spent the time with us. And what happened? Dopamine levels were risen. And it happened on the beach. And it's really important for you to hear. Now this guy is Alexander Wunsch. And many of you may not know this, but Dave and Tree tried to get Alexander here to speak. I asked him to get him, but it was logistically and financially not feasible. You heard him in the movie. He's German. My name used to be Kruse before World War I, so he's my brother from another mother. So I've decided to use a lot of his slides and also some of his ideas to show you exactly what you need to know about light. And it's probably the most important thing. And this is for you guys. There's somebody in this audience, I don't know who it is. Every time I come give a talk, I always meet one person, and I usually tell that person, I know the reason why I had to come here was to meet you. So far, I haven't met that person yet, so we'll see how it goes. Bottom line, I'm grateful to be here, but also to share the ideas with you, because these changed my life in a big way. Everything I'm about to tell you is in these books. If you're going to take one picture, take a picture of all these books. There's more, but this is where a mitochondriac starts, okay? And you heard when Ruben started the movie about Unbound, he showed that picture and told you what Unbound means. Innovation is about taking things that are known and connecting them in ways that nobody's ever thought about before. My entire talk, I'm going to tell you right now in about 15 or 20 seconds exactly what I'm going to tell you. All you need to know is that slide right there. Okay? I could technically end the talk with this. What does that equation mean to everybody? And you just answer it yourself, but I'm going to tell you what it means to me today. Energy and mass are exactly the same thing. The only thing that's different is the environment that each side of the equation is in, okay? So what does this mean? This means that when you slow light down, you create things of mass. That means everything in this room, this farm, this planet, at one time used to be light. And that is very counterintuitive to some people. They don't believe that's true. That was Einstein's innovation. And the problem is in medicine, biology, research, science, PhD, nutrition people, they don't get it. And last year, I came here and told you that's what the basis of the food web is. It's light through photosynthesis. So if you don't know about light, you don't know about food. And that's a really controversial thing to say to people who are big into food. I don't care. I really don't, because it's true. Now I'm going to show you how we work, the other side of the equation. The key innovation occurred 650 million years ago in photosynthesis. That's when we stole a bacteria and turned it into a chloroplast and we made food. What did the plants do? They made oxygen as a byproduct, and they also put DHA in the seas, okay? We know that life started in the seas. What happened 600 million years ago is important to everybody in the room. That's where all complex life came from, through the Cambrian explosion. But what was the key innovation? It's right there on the bottom. A mitochondria brought the C inside the cell. And why is that important? Because we had to bring water inside to make life work. So if you want a key slide, take a picture of this one. Because last year's talk focused on that, and this year's talk focuses right on this. And basically what you have is a coupled system. And what people don't realize, that system is reversed here. And here's the key thing that you need to understand. Ruben talked a little bit about DC electricity. What people don't realize is when a caterpillar eats a leaf at shell-borne forms, it stimulates a DC current of injury that Becker talks about in his book. The researcher that did that was Alan Burr at Yale University, 1929. You should know that. Guess what? When I cut people in surgery, every time I cut them, What stimulates the healing repair? It generates a DC electric current, and it tends to work, as Ruben said, with red blood cells in a very elaborate way that Becker laid out in his books. If you don't know that, you need to, and I'm going to show you why you need to. Most of you may or may not know my story. 12 years ago, I was a big dude, really big dude, and it was one of the things that kind of really bothered me. And the thing is, I would tell you, from failures, you get your successes. And no matter what your issue is today, there's going to be something in this talk that is going to allow you to improve your own situation. And for me, it was a crazy story that many of you may have heard in the podcast. It's tied to this book. And I'm not going to get too deep into the book, but it's an old one. But here's the key. It was a guy named Julian Battle, who's a famous attorney in New York City. Remember, this is a fable. It's a bullshit story. It's not for true, okay? But it turns out he had a heart attack in the middle of the courtroom, and he was an asshole. That means low dopamine. So that's the reason why I started out with the low dopamine story. Well, he has a heart attack. He decides to sell all his earthly things, go back in. He went to the Himalaya mountains, came back, realized that there's 25,000 sunrises in a life. He was tan. He lost 100 pounds. And he was a nice guy now, and people couldn't figure it out. So the person that sent me this book was trying to give me a different message. And that message for this talk is not important. But what is important is, what did I take away from this book? Those things right there, those were the key things that I didn't know. I didn't know these things were possible. Then I started thinking about the book after some of the papers that I'd started reading. I said, is this possible that this could happen in real life? And that was my picture around 2005. And I was a low dopamine neurosurgeon at that time. Some people may still consider me that way, but I think I'm a little bit better than I am today than I was then. But I want you to look at the title of that. I guarantee very few people in this room believe what's up there. Does obesity begin in the eye? I'm going to tell you, when I'm done with you, you're going to see a different perspective than you've ever seen before. Because I'm going to tell you the answer is yes. And how I got pretty famous on the internet is by writing something called a leptin prescription. When you go read it, you'll never see the word light in it. It just gives you 6 steps to do, and you'll find out why those 6 steps are important. But what did I do when I read the book? Immediately, I realized the guy went to the Himalaya mountains. What's really interesting about the Himalaya mountains is, you see India's right here. The equator runs right through here. Noticed that the equator bisects that country. The other thing that I knew about the Himalaya mountains, they're really high up, like 25 to 30,000 feet. And one of the things that I realized immediately is that would change the light frequency of what that person would get. And it turns out, for every 1,000 feet you go up, you get more UV light. And then I remembered in the book, he said, yeah, he was tan. So that meant he had to have a lot more UVA light, because UVA light tans. I did learn something in medical school from dermatologists. But the other key thing that I started to notice is, I remember in medical school learning about how haplotypes in mitochondria vary by geography and also by latitude. So this is the key. This is where the cradle of life is, right here. Why is this important for everybody in the room to understand? Because people that live in the East African Rift Zone, the original humans, they have an L0 haplotype. What does that mean? That means they do not uncouple their mitochondria. Why is that? They need all their energy to run away from lions, okay? People that live up here, which is most of us in the room, why? Because we come from Northern European haplotypes, we uncouple our mitochondria. What does that mean? That means we don't use food electrons to make energy, to make ATP. We use it to make heat. Why? Because there's no lions up here. You don't have to worry about lions. You have to worry about freezing your ass off, okay? So you release heat from your mitochondria, and that does something specific to water that's sitting around your mitochondria. And what is that? It's something that's very counterintuitive. Warm shrinks water. Cold expands it. Well, why is that important to a mitochondriac? Well, it goes back to this story right here. And if you look, most of us have these haplotypes right up here. Well, when you take a mitochondria and shrink it down, that brings the respiratory proteins closer together. What do we know in quantum physics? Anytime you have an energy transfer, when electrons move across a redox couple, the closer they are together, the more energy efficient they are. Isn't that interesting? I started putting these things together. I said, somehow that must be important. Then I started to read papers that every 1 angstrom, the distance between respiratory proteins drops off the energy it makes by a factor of 10. So what did I start to realize? Was being a fat ass really tied to energy excess, or is it maybe tied to energy loss back to the environment? Got me thinking. And I wasn't sure, but this paper came from the #1 mitochondrial researcher in the world. If you don't know his name, this is a name you want to write down, Dr. Doug Wallace. And he just won the Franklin Award. That's usually something they give to somebody before they win a Nobel. He's going to win a Nobel Prize. He's the guy that found out that mitochondria are inherited from your mother only. He's also the one that linked all diseases, and this is going to shock you, because I know most people don't know this. You have 2 genomes inside every cell. You have your nuclear genome and you have your mitochondrial. Medicine focuses in on the genetic one. I don't. I focus in on the mitochondrial one. The reason for that, it makes all the energy in your body. And guess what we now know from the science of epigenetics? Energy turns on and off the genome. That's the only thing that does it. So we come to a point, how do we make energy proximal to a mitochondria in our body? Where does the process first start? Well, this is when I started to look at sunlight. And there's an interesting thing here. What your eyes can see is 380 to 780, okay? Just for those of you who don't know, this is UV light, UVA, and that's red light. But here's the funny thing. The spectrum of the sun goes from, this is actually incorrect, this is Dr. Wunsch's slide, but it's 250 all the way up to 3,000. So it raised a question, why are we not seeing these? And not only that, why is the retina, because most of you may not know this, we as humans are blind to UV light and to infrared light. We can't see it. But why is it there, and why doesn't our eye look at it? And I thought that was very peculiar. Then I started to learn about things in quantum mechanics. And the reason that that occurs is something called the quantum Zeno effect. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to tell you that when you observe a frequency, it changes the reality you get. And it turns out that all the key signaling in your eye works on the frequencies you can't see. And it's done that way by design. So, this question made me realize that there is an issue in the eye. We have an eye camera. Almost everybody in this room would not argue that your eye is predominantly something we use to see, as we're doing right now. But there's this other thing that I learned about in neurosurgery called the clock. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Most of you probably heard it. It's the main circadian oscillator. And I started to wonder, is there a difference based in these frequencies between these 2 systems in the eye, and how do they somehow link? So I went further. In 1879, everything changed. This is when we had the first incandescent bulb. I challenge anybody in this room to go back and find me any papers where there's any chronic diseases present. In fact, Doug Wallace has publicly said 85 to 90% of human diseases are related to mitochondrial origins. Okay? Chronic diseases began right around the turn of the century. For those of you who don't believe it, I think I told you this last year. In 1900, colon cancer was the 37th leading cause of death in the United States. Today, it's number 2. So if you believe in Darwin's paradigm, explain to me how in 5 generations we went from 37 to 2. It's impossible. But guess what makes it possible? When you understand the energetics from a mitochondria. And guess what? That's what Wallace has been teaching people, and nobody is listening in my profession. Okay? And that includes the PhD researchers, because they're the ones that teach us in medical school. But Wallace has been banging this drum for a long time. So the evolution of light doesn't equal the evolution built into your cells. Let's take it further. You saw this picture from Rubin. 4.6 billion years. 1980s, 1879, here. But this is the key thing I want to show you. What's the key in this picture? Red balances blue. Don't forget that. I'm going to make sure you have that burned into your retina when I get done with you. Now, if Dave wants to invite me back, we'll talk about the skin next year. This is not a talk about skin, okay? But it's important. But this year is all about the eye. And this picture, the reason why I put it up here is I want to show you, this is what I learned in medical school. The anterior chamber, the lens, and the cornea block UV light. That's what every doctor in the United States is still taught to this very day, okay? So when I went on this journey after reading The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, I found out that was bullshit too, okay? And it turns out, if you look at the signals get through, 1% of UVB gets through, and 3% of UVA gets through. And you heard one of the other speakers mention something about collagen and piezoelectricity. And it's not important that you know that, but you know what is important? The vitreous of the eye is a special collagen. It's not found anywhere else in the body. You know what it does? Slows light down before it gets to the retina. I was like, that's kind of interesting, because what did I say to you before about the E equals MC squared? Anytime you slow light down, you create things with structure, with mass. You create matter, don't you? So I thought this was kind of interesting. And then I also want to teach you another thing that's really important about UV light. It's the only part of the visible spectrum that works in a nonlinear fashion. What does nonlinear mean? My members know what it means, but I want to make sure you guys know. A small stimulus leads to a massive amplification. In other words, it can have massive effects that you don't anticipate. Well, we're going to talk about some of those, okay? The key thing, this is a picture from Ben's movie. You need to question everything. You're looking at a guy speaking to you right now who doesn't believe pretty much anything he learned in medical school can be taken with any truth. You need to examine everything. And this story about me constructing the leptin prescription and all these things I learned about the eye are the reason why I'm passionate about what I do. Now, the pupil is a perfect black box radiator. What does that mean? Because we're doing a little physics here. It means that light can go in and come back. How did I know immediately that UV light got through? I challenge anybody to go to Batteries and Bulbs, buy a UVA flashlight, LED, put it in anybody's retina. You know what you'll see? You'll see fluorescence come right back. You don't need anything else. So every time the ophthalmologist, like when I gave this talk 3 months ago and I proved to them they were full of shit, that's how I did it. I brought a UVA flashlight and shined it in all their eyes. I said, what did you see? Explain, based on what we learned in medical school. That shut them up pretty quick, okay? Because you don't need a lot of photons to see the effect. This is something that everybody in this room can do, reproducible. So when you go to the ophthalmologist, you can say, I don't believe what you're telling me. But here's the key. You guys have heard from all your food gurus that you've heard previously talk at all these other years about tryptophan, about tyrosine, about phenylalanine, and histidine. But you know what you don't know about aromatic amino acids? They all absorb UV light. Did you know that? Well, I didn't 12 years ago. But the key thing is the eye is loaded with these amino acids specifically. So that raised a question. Why is this? Well, I found out from physics that a benzene ring, which is in every single aromatic amino acid, is a photon trap. And they absorb all frequencies of UV light. So guess what that means? That 250 to 380 is absorbed by this. That's the reason why we don't see it, because it's designed to do something different, okay? And here's the key. Every single protein in the body, and this is something that was missed earlier in one of the talks, I didn't want to say anything. Every protein in your body is hydrated, okay? Zinc cannot bind to a protein in the way you were told earlier today. And I'm going to show you the reason why, and I'm going to tell you exactly how it really works, okay? The other big thing to know is from Pollack's work. I would tell anybody, if you're going to read the first book, Pollack's one is a great one because it's a third grade reading book. Everybody will understand the basics of water. But for this talk, it's not good enough. So There's something that started. Pollack's book came out in 2014. There's two researchers named Gelduce and Perparta. In 2000, they found that the EZ forms something called the coherent domain. 13% of the exclusion zone in water, when sunlight hits water, makes something called the coherent domain, which makes 1 million electrons, free electrons, delocalized to run all the biochemical programs. Does anybody know how many biochemical programs run per second in a cell? It's 100,000. Guess what has the control of those enzymatic flux? If you ask any PhD or any nutritionist at all, the answer is they don't know the answer. But guess what? It turns out light frequencies can control all of them by a molecular resonance phenomenon. And that is how biochemistry works. Now, this one is for the McKissick lecture. Everything that she told you is in this slide. So if you want to learn how light works, here you go. This is a protein. UV light hits it. That is a light antenna. It's surrounded by water. Light is an electromagnetic wave that changes to an electromechanical wave. That's called sound. That sound is collected in water. Now, here's the interesting thing. Water is a magnetic dipole. What does that mean? Hydrogen and oxygens, positive and negative. That's the reason why it's tied to magnetism. The first time that we found out that magnetism truly controls sound, Ohio State University, Acoustic Phonons 2014. You can look it up, okay? Some of us already knew this, and the reason why we knew it is here's the key. When the light hits here, it's absorbed in the water. That changes the hydrogen bonding networks. What is the physical change? The physical change is the density of the water. That is how this works. Fundamentally, quantum mechanically. Now, here's the interesting thing. Mitochondria makes the cytosolic water that surrounds all the things in the cytosol, including the nucleus and the mitochondria. Where is this connection? Well, for those of you who don't know, the Schumann resonance comes from the interaction of sunlight on the ionosphere of the Earth. That's why people call it the heartbeat of Earth. But it's an electrical tension that develops between the solar plasma and the atmosphere that generates the 7.83 hertz. Why do you need to know about it? What I tell you my day job was, I'm a neurosurgeon, right? The alpha wave in the human brain is 7.83 hertz, exactly the same. So guess what? The solar system entrains you to these solar systems as it comes to Earth. That's how it works, okay? Why is it important? It generates the alpha wave. So when you live in an environment today, you don't have as many alpha waves. Why? Because non-native EMF, what's the number one effect, which you'll learn about later, dehydrates your cells because it lowers your redox potential in your mitochondria. In other words, original slide, you can't make as much water from your own mitochondria. That's where the dehydration comes. And for the ladies in the room or the guys in the room who are not big science people, simple biohack at home, take a piece of steak that you have left over, throw it in the microwave, taste it. What does it taste like? Shoe leather. Why? What do microwaves do? They vibrate and rotate water really fast. It heats up and it dehydrates the meat. It's happening to you right now here in Vermont. It's happening to all of us because of these shitty lights that we have. Okay, getting back to the topic. The eye, the SCN is the big focus. In medicine, the big focus is on the camera. That's why all these old people go see the ophthalmologist, and what do they get? Cataract surgery, right? Anybody know what they put in for cataract surgery after it's done? An implantable lens. And guess what that lens blocks? UVA, UVB, 100%, and also, these days, 50% of blue light, in case you didn't know that. That's been a change since 2009. We'll go there later. That's a little different story. It's even worse. So getting back to this story, what people don't realize, 42% of sunlight that falls to Earth is infrared A light. It's balanced all the time by blue, okay? Especially when the sun rises. Now, this is a side picture of an eyeball. What you need to know, and this goes back to physics, in case you don't, blue light bends the most by gravitational lensing. It turns out this is important in the eye because when blue light comes through, it falls in front of the retina. That's the reason why when you use a computer screen or you use these horrible lights up here, you get visual obscuration. In other words, your vision gets worse. What does that cause? It causes you elongation of your eyeball. When your eyeball gets longer, you get myopia. What happens when you get myopia? The next step is you get retinal detachments. What's the end result? Acute macular degeneration. Anybody know anybody who's got that? Yeah, lots of people. And guess what else? Guess what causes cataracts? Blue light toxicity. Why? The brain is trying to protect itself from this light that's coming in, so it makes the lens hazy, so this doesn't happen. But why is it important to a mitochondriac? Well, it turns out in about 2003, 2004, through 2009, we had some really cool researchers that found out there's another opsin in the eye. And that opsin works with the retinal ganglion cells, and that's called melanopsin. Melanopsin is the hormone that runs the central retinal pathways in the eye. And it turns out they're really important at nighttime, and they link to melatonin, but not in the way most people think. The fovea is where the rest of the visual light spectrum fall, and it falls right here. Why? That's acute vision. That's your camera focus. That's what the ophthalmologists all pay attention to. They don't pay attention to this. The only ophthalmologists that do, you're going to hear about later, are the Japanese guys, who are the guys that I talked to 3 months ago. They've been on this way quicker than our American counterparts. But here's the key. I'm going to make a very controversial statement now for many people in this room. The central retinal pathway energizes everything distal to it. So let me explain that to you. It basically turns on your pituitary gland, and it turns on everything distal in the human brain. And I'm going to show you how. This paper, I should say this gentleman, his name is Fritz Hallwich. He was an amazing cat. He was an ophthalmologist in Germany. He was born in the 1920s. He happened to live in a time where we didn't have intraocular lenses. And one of the things that he noticed is that when he saw people with cataracts, he would cut the cataract out so they could see. And for those of you who don't know, this is what happened to Vincent van Gogh. You know, when he painted haystacks, the reason why he painted them in all different colors is because when you take a cataract out and you don't put a lens in, you can see UV, in case you didn't know that. So that's the reason why haystacks has all the different shades, because he was able to see it in so many different colors as the light changed. Well, it turns out this doctor actually practiced medicine in a time that we could never recapitulate now. And that's why sometimes looking back is a good thing. And I started to look really far back. In fact, as a neurosurgeon, these guys, especially Cajal in 1891, he's the father of modern neuroanatomy. I started to find papers about this energetic pathway that has huge effects on growth and metabolism through the eye. You didn't hear me say gut. You didn't hear me say food, did you? Turns out that Hallwich did something rather remarkable. And he wrote about it in this book here from 1979. And I guarantee you nobody in this room's ever read it. If you think Weston A. Price's book is huge, you should read this sucker, because it's unbelievable what he did. He basically took cataracts out of people and then noticed and watched them and saw that their growth and metabolism improved tremendously. They started to lose weight. They started to feel better. They started to sleep better. And he documented it all. And guess what? He didn't just do it in humans. He did it in all kinds of animals. And he documented the color changes that occurred on animals after he took the cataracts out. How their coats changed, their surfaces, how they started to act on the farm. Okay? That's how important this was. And he went even further. He checked their urine. And you know what he found? He found there was metabolites of hormones that occurred after he took the cataract out that weren't there before. So in other words, light was able to make chemicals in us that weren't there before. Doesn't that sound a lot like E equals MC squared? Like, how did light get turned into things with structure, things with mass, things that you heard Chris Masterjohn talked about earlier? How does this really happen? Do you really think that you need it all from diet and exercise? There's another way. There is another way. And when he did these studies, it was incredible. And I have to tell you, most of the ophthalmologists I talked to 3 months ago didn't know a damn thing about Fritz Hallwich. And he was an ophthalmologist and well published. And the crazy thing is there was another guy that you're going to learn about a little bit later named John Ott. And you know what he was famous for? He was Walt Disney's animator that did time-lapse photography, okay? I don't know the movie. You guys may know the name. But it was in 1971 he came up with it, and he had flowers that he showed grow and do all different kinds of things. Turns out that he made some key investigative slides for Disney and dropped it, but then he took it to the medical boards and different physicians who let it go by the wayside. And what he found is that when he took plants and he put them in different light, the chloroplast molecules rotated faster than not. Then he decided to do it on animals, and he found out that one of the cells in the eye called the retinal pigmentum epithelium, which you're going to hear about shortly, at the base of the eye, has melanin granules that absorb what? UV light, because it's made out of those things that we talked about, rotates faster, and guess what it makes? What Ruben talked about, a DC electric current in the eye. So that means you can regenerate tissues when you have a high DC electric current. Isn't that right, Ruben? Didn't Becker tell us that? Isn't that interesting? He went even further, and this is probably one of the most counterintuitive things I'm going to tell you. This is a picture of people's pituitary glands who were blind and who could see. What did he do? He went the extra distance. This is what I want you to focus in on. Light slows, energy is lost, the pituitary gets bigger. When I saw this, I immediately realized that everything in medicine was completely ass backwards. Why? Why did I say that to you? Everybody in this room, except the people that heard me talk last year, believe that people get fatter because they eat too much. Turns out it's exactly the opposite. So I'm going to ask, well, I'm not going to ask Ruben this. I'm going to ask somebody who I don't know. You, I don't know you. All right. When you sprain your ankle, does your ankle get bigger or smaller? Okay. When you have heart failure, does your heart get bigger or smaller? Okay. Just so you know, he said it gets bigger. Here's the third one. When the star in the sky dies, does it get bigger or smaller? It gets a red giant. So everything that loses energy in the universe gets bigger. What did Hallwich tell us? Hallwich showed that when light slows, the pituitary gets bigger. You know why it's getting bigger? Because light is getting turned into chemicals that you call hormones that go in to the nuclear DNA to change it. Guess what that means? That means light is capable of altering DNA. It also means that light is capable of potentially reversing my previous problem. Meaning that when you're obese, maybe your main problem is you're not getting enough sunlight, and it has nothing to do with food. How's that for a shocker? That's what Fritz Hollwich taught me. So I didn't believe any of this, and most of you may not know this, but I went to medical school at LSU. And there's a very, very famous ophthalmologic researcher named Nicholas Bazan who's done incredible work. And you know what he's cut his teeth on? DHA. He's like the DHA guy in the world. And I learned this back in 95 through 99 when I was there. He taught me a lot of crap. And crap that I thought was crap because it wasn't important to neurosurgery, but 12 years ago it became extremely important. To me right now, it's huge. And the number one effect right here in this central retinal pathway between the clock and your hypothalamus, you have two loops in the eye. One loop's called the short loop, the other one's called the long loop. And what it does, it recycles DHA constantly as light comes through. It's coupled to vitamin A, which you're going to hear about later, and I'm going to tell you why that's important. But the key thing that I realized, Bazan taught me, that this central retinal pathway and the retina had more DHA in it than any other part of the brain. And I thought that was bizarre. Then I realized why. When I started to learn about physics, remember the guys who came out with GPS devices, Garmin devices? Well, it turns out that the clock here has to run faster than all the other clocks in the rest of your body. If it doesn't work. So if you have an iPhone and you use it to go to a restaurant here in Vermont, the clock that's up in the sky, up there has to run 38 microseconds faster than the one in your iPhone. Otherwise, you're going to be 100 kilometers off. That would not work. You'd wind up in New Hampshire. It wouldn't be good. It turns out in your eye, the exact same thing happens. And the reason why DHA in the eye is important, because this DC electric current runs faster than every other part of your body. That's the reason why DHA is important. And it turns out when you have too much blue light, because blue light is the antidote for vitamin A and for DHA. Do you know why? What kind of light makes vitamin A? Anybody want to guess? You heard somebody talk about it earlier. Blue light makes vitamin A. How do you know? Is there any artists in the room? What's the complementary color to blue? Yellow. And guess what? Vitamin A is yellow. Isn't that a shocker? That's the link between this. Light frequencies control the level of vitamin A in the eye. And also, every opsin in the body is tied to retinol, to vitamin A. There's not an opsin in the human body that's not tied to it. That's the reason why, and Chris is here so he can verify this. He wrote a very nice blog post, I don't know how long ago it was, that there's data from N. Haynes that when you have deficiencies of vitamin A, it's tied to obesity. And nobody has told you why. I'm telling you why right now. Because you're blue light toxic. Blue light makes you fat. Okay? Really fat. And it starts right here. And it ruins this boson effect. And the crazy thing about the long loop, the way you recycle DHA, this is the way it works. When photosynthesis makes it in the sea, in plankton, it's mostly in the SN1 and the SN3 position. You heard Ruben talk a little bit about this earlier. Well, SN1 and SN3 get changed when the fish eat it and the fish change it to SN2. What does SN2 mean? It means that it becomes planar, like a semiconductive plane, which is important in the eye. That's the reason why taking algae when you're a vegan is idiotic, because there's not enough in there. You need the seafood to make the molecular change, okay? And there's papers out there that show that SN2 is the only thing that gets into the central and peripheral nervous system of eukaryotes, which everybody in this room is. So guess what? That was another piece of the puzzle. So we knocked that one out. I went back and looked at this. The reason why this is not equal is because light, the evolution of light, does not equal the evolution of our retinal anatomy. I started to put this together pretty quick. Then I started to look at sunrise and sunset. When the sun rises, you have visible and infrared light. You don't have any UV initially. But guess what else happens at this time? You don't need your rods and you don't need melanopsin in the morning. So guess when they regenerate? They regenerate in the AM. Guess what else happens? You actually make melatonin in your eye in the morning. The hormone of darkness is first made in the human body in the eye. In the morning, when you have a combination of UVA and infrared A light. And the reason for you is what I told you before about the aromatic amino acid that absorbs that. And you see that UVA light doesn't show up here. So for the guy last night, who I don't know who you are, but asked the question, how am I going to do this as an executive and fix my life? This is the key. You need to reconstruct your AM to fix your real problem. And that was what I had to do to my surgery schedule. That's why I stopped operating at 7 a.m. Started all my cases at 8:30. It's also the reason why I moved to the 28th latitude from where I lived. Why? Because UVA light shows up. Now, you guys here that live in Vermont got some bad news for you. If you've got a mitochondrial disease, which most diseases are, you need that UVA light, and it shows up later here than it does in New Orleans. So guess what that means? You need more control of your life in the morning than any other time. That's the practical advice, okay? These are not Jack Kruse's rules. These are the sun's rules, okay? Hold on, I'm not done. Questions later. Sunset, this is when you don't need color vision. This is the camera. They regenerate at nighttime. There's another opsin that you may not know about. It's called neuropsin. It's on the cornea of the eye, and it's on your skin. It's a UVA light detector. So if the ophthalmologists are right, why don't you ask them, well, why do we have a UVA light receptor in our eye if it's really bad for us? Well, it turns out this is going to be really important right now. Melatonin is considered the hormone of darkness. Remember those photon traps I told you about? Well, guess what? That neuropsin tells the brain that UVA light is present, and it can begin to make melatonin from sunlight. How do you like that? Now, what are all the effects? Here's the quantum paradox. It's a nighttime hormone because that's what the functional medicine doctors in my profession have told you, And that's true, because that's when it's active, but it only activates when light is not present, but it's remade first in the eye and then generalizes all along the brain. The other key thing, and I'll just point this out to you right here, this one should open everybody's eyes. It reduces energy production in mitochondria. UVA light turns down energy production. And why is that important? There's the fourth cytochrome is cytochrome C oxidase in everybody's mitochondria in here. Anybody want to guess what kind of light turns it on? Red light. UV light turns it off. And the reason why, what does UV light make in the skin or the eye? Anybody who's a member of mine? Nitric oxide. And guess what? That's why UV light lowers your blood pressure, because it causes 40 to 60% of dermal pooling, and it helps your heart. But what people don't realize the effect is, it turns off your ability to make ATP from food electrons. There's another piece of the equation that may be really counterintuitive for some of you in this room. It has a lot of other effects. One of these, if you have breast cancer or prostate cancer, you may want to pay attention to that one, because it affects the aromatase enzyme. That's the reason why when Ruben said before, well, ladies, you may not want to do this, and I said, oh no, they want to take the girls out to the sunlight, because guess what? That's the reason why breast cancer is through the roof, okay? You need to get your body parts out in the sun. So for those of you who don't believe, this is just from May 19th. This was a study that came out. Look what it said. Morning daylight exposure tied to better sleep. Okay? Remember, I've been telling you this 12 years ago. This is on Facebook a week ago. People are now beginning to get the message. Okay? Taking melatonin is a great way to ruin sleep. Okay? It's something a mitochondriac would never do when you understand how this process works. Okay, Nathan Walls, here's your slide. Here's the key that I want to explain to you. You have this direct loop that goes to the pineal gland, but the energy comes in here. This energy has to be balanced, blue and red. What does this first do? It turns your pituitary gland on. That's the reason why the question that was asked to Ruben before is extremely important. Blue light, balanced by red, is what turns on hormone production. If you look at a circadian mechanism, all the hormones are made usually from 6 to 10 in almost any medical textbook. They're assuming that you live around the 30th latitude. That's not true. It's different at different places, but it's a key. Anybody want a shocker? What turns off hormone production? UVA light on the skin, first time it shows up. UV light is what turns off in your blood plasma. And I have a slide on that later. But what's the key point here? The key point here is this paraventricular nucleus, which is part of the hypothalamus. That's where the sympathetic nervous system begins and ends. That's the key. So anytime you hear anybody talk about adrenal fatigue, if you go to my site and read Brain Gut 16, adrenal fatigue is due to an altered light spectrum. And the reason why? That nucleus fires everything in the sympathetic system. That's where sympathetic overdrive comes, and that's where most problems come. What goes down? The vagal motor system. Where is that located? Back here in the fourth ventricle. And what ties to it? The vagus nerve that goes to the gut, the thing that y'all love to talk about. But guess what? Where does the problem start? In the brain, through the eye. Okay? The back link here is really interesting. This interesting link goes right from the PVN to the sympathetic trunk down in the neck. Do you know that we have opsins in our cervical spinal cord? Anybody want to guess why that's the case? Where's brown fat in humans? Guess why? That's how it ties. That's when you start burning things for free heat. What's the other thing? What does the superior cervical ganglion control in the brain? I don't expect you to know this because you'll know you're not a neurosurgeon. It controls cerebral blood flow. So that means it controls the amount of blood that gets to your brain. Think that may have any play in, say, AMD? How about Alzheimer's? Parkinson's? You know any of these diseases, like any of the old people in the group? Ask your grandmother, did she ever see any of these diseases when she was young? The answer is no. But what showed up in 1879? Light bulbs. Kind of interesting, huh? This is Matt's slide. Matt told you about this. That connection goes right there. All the sympathetics run on the carotid and external carotid system that go right to your nose. That's the reason why it happens. And the key is you need to understand what's going on here. The light that comes through at nighttime that you have to block is 400 to 465. That's what my glasses are doing right now for me. These are the BPI tints. The reason I have them on now is because this crap up here, okay? I don't want the signal that the sun just rose, because you see it's 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That will ruin my ability to sleep at night. That's the reason you block it, even when you're inside. When I'm in surgery in the middle of the day, that's what I do. In between cases, I go straight out to the sun. Now, I want you to look at the eyes. You have the pituitary stalk and you have the hypothalamus. What controls all these? CSF. CSF is made out of 99, and for those of you who don't know what CSF is, cerebral spinal fluid, okay? Cerebral spinal fluid is an ultrafiltrate of blood plasma. It is made out of 99.8% water, okay? So that means light changes between these things. Here's the key. Light plus water equals the exclusion zone. You got that from Pollack's book. Everybody knows that, but here's the key. 13% of EZ is the coherent domain that makes 1 million free electrons that run everything in biochemistry, okay? And if you don't believe me, look at this slide. For those of you who are not physicists, Tina Carew is probably the leading researcher from Russia in LLLT and photobiomodulation, which is really all the study of red light. Here's the key to life. I tell all my members this and they know it. This is an excited electron. This is a regular ground state electron. You know what life's all about? In this slide, this is called a Jablonski diagram, for those of you who don't know. That excited light falls to the ground state. Here's how all the things occur. This is the redox pile of electrons. That runs everything in a mitochondria. Here's the ROS signal. As light slows down, all these things occur in a mitochondria. Light slows down further, and look what happens. You get biochemical changes activity. This is what most of the people in this room who've talked to you today, this is the level they're at. They don't know that much about how this all occurs. And it all occurs as an excited electron releases light to the mitochondrial system. That's what controls you. It's not what you think. So, when we talk about nature, here's the problem with my profession. This is what we need to realize. We need people to reconnect with nature instead of PhD researchers who are worried about getting their journal articles in Nature, okay? So they can get funded. We need to think about this a little bit differently. And when I had this realization, Fritz Hallwich's work basically was recapitulated in Ott's book. That's Ott's book right there. For those of you who don't know, you can find it probably for $2 on Amazon because it's so old. But you need to read his book. It's amazing. And for the ladies in the room, never wear anything pink again. You'll get the message, the reason why, when you read that book. But all these things opened my eyes to something that I had never appreciated before. So I went back and I started to look at light. And here's light in the visible spectrum. Most people know it goes between UV and IR. But here's this other part right here. Life tends to also use the 7.83 hertz because that's what runs the EEGs and the alpha waves in your brain. But here's the funny part. Modern life is right here. And life is not designed to use any of these. And these are all the things down here that do it. What happens when you use these? You lose the alpha wave in the brain. And when you lose the alpha wave in the brain, that's when you have to do some of the crazy stuff that Ruben's talked to you about using biofeedback to retune the circadian oscillator in your eye. What's the best way to do that, Ruben? Become the Sphinx. The Sphinx looks to the east every morning with all 4 extremities grounded. That is the best way to retrain the circadian oscillator in your body, through your eye, while you're grounded. So instead of thinking like a neurosurgeon, I started to think like Ruben. I started to think thermodynamically. And that's not something doctors are taught to do. And the key part was right here. Life can only exist between UV and IR light. And it became imperative for me to figure out how in the hell this really works. So I would bring you back to this again. Tryptophan, tyrosine, phenylalanine, histidine. They all do really important things. Here's the key. I told you that I came up with something called the leptin prescription. I told you this was a photon trap. Take a look at leptin down here. Synthesized in 1994, Rockefeller University. You see a whole bunch of photon rings? Could it be that this chemical that's made where? In your fat? Where's human fat? Subcutaneous, isn't it? That's kind of interesting. But this goes to your hypothalamus and tells the hypothalamus what your energy status is in your body. So I went further. I started looking at the aromatic amino acids. You got phenylalanine and tyrosine. You got precursors. Oh, we heard about thyroid hormones. Look at that. From UV light, you make this chemical that makes the hormones there. It comes from light, folks. What's the next big step? You have DOPA. You've all heard of that. Look at all the other chemicals that it makes. Everything you hear from the functional medicine doctors is made through your eye right there. How about this one? Tryptophan, serotonin, melatonin. All these connections. This one's even more interesting for anybody in the room who's a white boy like me with Northern European skin, who goes out in the sun and gets really red. When you come to a quantum clinician, that tells us by definition you never see UVA light. And the reason why is uricanic acid, which is made from histidine. It's the key. And one of the biohacks that I did with the Qualant that you guys may be interested in, I figured out a way to actually stay in the sun longer with my weak skin. And how did I do it? I did it by hybrid tanning. Hybrid tanning is when I use infrared A light to precondition the system so I could absorb more UV light. So guess what? When I did that, I actually lost more weight. And I backed up this recently when the Qualant went live. It actually works. So what's the story? AM sunlight, meaning it's got to be red, balanced, and blue with diurnal UV, meaning UV shows up later, but it's important, and you got to get it through your eye. Wearing contacts, no bueno. Wearing glasses, no bueno. That's why when you see me outside, you see me like this, or I'll put it on when the UV's out. The other big thing is this system, the way it works, has that feedback loop. The melatonin first made in your eye is incredibly important. And there's one other thing that's on that slide I want to point out, just because we've had a recent problem. Don't you think it's kind of funny that balanced AM light through this pituitary gland makes this chemical here called beta endorphin? Anybody know what that is? That is an opiate. Do you know what Mother Nature's telling us on this slide? That we are designed to be addicted to the sun. So you know that we just had a recent famous guy, Soundgarden guy, who I used to listen to when I was Chris Cornwell. He died, and what did he die? What did Kurt Cobain die of? Drug addiction. What about Michael Jackson? Drug addiction. What do you know about musicians? They're always around non-native EMF, and they're always doing concerts when? At night. Under what kind of light? Why do they have to use drugs? Because their body can't make beta endorphin. So guess what? Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, should I go on? You are designed by Mother Nature to be in the sun, contrary to what the dermatologists and ophthalmologists tell you. And the proof is right there. So, remember I told you that leptin's a fat hormone, right? Here's what you may not know. UVC, which we hardly ever get, only penetrates the epidermis, but UVB light stops at the epidermis. But look at UVA, it gets to the fat area. Isn't that interesting? How about infrared A? It penetrates the body between 10 and 30 centimeters. So for you ladies in the audience, what does that mean? When light hits you here, it can go all the way and hit your thoracic vertebrae. So if you want to know how to avoid osteoporosis, take your freaking clothes off, because that's the key. And just so you guys know, as a spine surgeon, and some of you may not know this, I used to be a dentist. I used to be an oral surgeon. The fastest way to reverse periodontalgia is the same way. Get light in. One of the things that people talked about earlier, people don't know this. Enamel and dentin are both fluorophore proteins. That means they release extreme low frequency UV light. Turns out that vitamin K2 looks exactly like coenzyme Q10 in the mitochondria. It absorbs both UV and IR light. Guess what vitamin A absorbs? Blue light. What does vitamin D come from? UVB light. I just gave you 3 frequencies of light that you're designed to get. You want to know how you get good teeth? You know, I told you guys last year that Weston A. Price, if he was alive today, would be part of my tribe and not yours. Every person he looked at Wasn't in a metabolic ward study like all the other idiots that keep studying these things. They were out in the sunlight, okay? And when we started blocking light frequencies, that's when we started seeing problems, okay? So this story about leptin went on, and the key was right here. UV light turns off the hormones in your skin. That's the reason why now when you see people come in and they get their hormone levels checked, they're flatlined. Why? Because the blue light is constantly turning them on because all of you are under it. And after a period of time, the compound pharmacy in your brain turns off. It doesn't work anymore. That's exactly what adrenal fatigue is. In other words, the system can no longer turn light into the chemicals that it needs. That's what you're seeing here. And this cerebral blood flow control is really important because the people in the audience, if you want to know where dementia is coming from and all the neurodegeneration, when you don't have blood flow, that means you don't have oxygen. We're talking about mitochondria. What's the terminal electron acceptor in mitochondria? Oxygen. It's totally tied to the amount of porphyrin hemoglobin that gets to your brain. And we're going to talk about that too because that story is linked. What's the key? The vitreous collagen is different. It slows light down. What light is it interested in? In UVA light. Why? What sits right here? The retinal pigmentum epithelium that's loaded with what? Melanin. That's why it's pigmented. What is melanin? A UV fluorophore protein. It absorbs that 3% of UVA that comes in and makes what? Melatonin. What else? Dopamine. Oh, there we go. So there's another way to raise your dopamine, looking at the sun. Not only talking to you nice people, but there's another way to do it. AM sunlight is critically important. It's the most important time of the day. If you miss it, there's no recapturing it. Remember what Ruben said, being consistent. Ask him how consistent I am about the sun in the morning. I am a Nazi when it comes to it. This is probably one of the coolest slides I'm going to show you in my whole talk. This is actually how the blood system really works. There is so much here that you need to look at. This is a red blood cell. Red blood cells are loaded with DHA. DHA absorbs the sunlight, but the other big thing that's in here is porphyrins. What do all porphyrins do? They absorb all frequencies of UV light. So basically, your red blood cell is a ferry boat for light. Now, I want you to look at this. Everything in the arterial wall, and Chris has done a really good job in his blog and his podcast about teaching people about this wall, about atherosclerosis. What it should look like is all these negative charges there. But as blood flow goes this way, that RBC makes an electromagnetic field around it. That electromagnetic field is designed to interact with these negative charges. What happens to be up there? Nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is released and the vessel gets bigger. We have one of my good friends, Josh, who's a sleep specialist. We talk about laminar flow, right, Josh? What happens when you have a negative charge here and a negative charge on the surface of the red blood cell? To repel, that's the reason why you don't get blood clotting. And that's the reason why when you go in an airplane, you get blood clots. That's the reason you get a PE. That's the reason why you die. When you're around a lot of blue light and non-native EMF, because this doesn't work. And you know there was a big talk in paleo circles about cholesterol. Turns out, if cholesterol is not sulfated, anybody want to guess what sulfates cholesterol? Sunlight. Shocker. Huh? Sunlight is the key. And what people don't realize that blood plasma is 93% water. This is the infrared A detector in your body, along with this one. Although hemoglobin has a sharp cutoff at 600, it's not the main one. This is really the UV collector. But blood is the big thing in terms of burying energy in it to ferry to each part of our body in different ways. Now, here's one of the key things. This is a picture of the optic nerve. This is the ophthalmic artery coming out. And I want you to know something. This is where your vision, the camera vision is in the fovea. This is the most sensitive part of the human retina to photons. It pays attention to 5 photons, okay? But there's an interesting thing here. You'll notice that there's no blood vessels there. And I told you that these photoreceptors have to regenerate, and I told you that UVA and infrared A light are the key to regenerating every photoreceptor in your eye. So how does this happen if there's no blood vessels there? I mean, you know that the RBCs are in these vessels, right? And this is a fluorescein dye study. Well, we go back to this. Remember I told you about that short wavelength light? That's UVA light, liberates nitric oxide. Not only does it do it in your skin, it does it in your eye. So it vasodilates that poor area, okay? And it enhances the circulation in that area, but it reduces energy production. So how does the photoreceptors make up the difference? Turns out it's infrared A light. Do you know what infrared A light does to CCO? CCO is cytochrome C reductase. It makes ATP without any food electrons. I'll be damned. You want to hear another crazy story? A 70-kilogram man has a requirement to make 85 kilograms of ATP a day. You have to make more ATP than you weigh. You get 1/3 of the electrons from food. You get 2/3 from sunlight. Okay, stop. What did I tell you before? Sunlight's how much infrared A? 42%. So let me ask you a question. I don't see anybody naked in this room. So could it be that you have to eat more to offset your lack of sunlight? Could that be the reason that maybe people are getting fat? Because we have dermatologists and people wearing clothes all the time and never go out in the sun. These are all the ideas that were coming up in my head. And you can see them right here. This is the key. And when I started putting all this together, I came up with the very inconvenient truth from my medical training that we have made a huge mistake in obesity. It really does start in the eye, and here's the picture that proves it. The more disconnected you are from the earth, as Ruben talked about grounding, and the less connected you are to the sun, the more food you have to eat to make the ATP you need. Turns out, the more connected you are, you turn out to be this guy. Now, let me be clear, there's no food in front of them. Do eukaryotes, humans who have huge mitochondrial capacity in their heart and their brain, need to eat? The answer is yes. So I'm not pounding on you food guys too bad. There's still a need for food and it's important. But what my point is it's less important when you are connected with nature. And nature has made you to be addicted to the sun. That's why everybody in this room feels good when they go to the beach. It's not because you're on vacation. It's because of beta endorphin. You get the same effect when you exercise, okay? You are built by nature to work this way. So, was the story really a fable? Well, guess what? That's when I got to be really controversial on the internet about 7 years ago, because I found that it wasn't a fable. It's actually true. And the reason why is all these photon receptors here get activated by UVA and infrared A light subcutaneously where humans keep their fat mass. And that message has to go to your hypothalamus and tell your hypothalamus truly what the energy status is in your body that's related to the sunlight you get, not the food you eat. Don't believe it? Take a look at the sun here in the skin. Like I said, this may be next year's talk. Visible light come through here, turns on all these systems. These are all the body systems. You'll see melatonin here, and you'll see all the D hormones here and all the sun hormones. When Ruben said the word allostasis or homeostasis, this is the slide that I had in mind. It is absolutely critical to understand if you have any imbalance in the system, that is where the organ system goes south. That is how it works. If you get out of the way, the anatomy is controlled by your nuclear DNA. It is built for perfection if you're in the right stimulus. None of you are in the right stimulus. No food can fix your problem when this is an error. That's the inconvenient truth. Now, did I believe it in the beginning? No. I told people last year when I was here, when I did the leptin prescription biohack on myself, I went into it not believing a damn thing. And then when I did it, I lost 77 pounds in 3 months and then 135 in 11. My wife used to come in and watch me in the shower, and the weight would come off. And she's like, I don't understand how this works. In 3 months, I added cold to the mix for a different reason. And that's not really part of this talk, but it is part of the story. But cold accelerated the loss. The reason why, it uncoupled my K haplotype more. I released more heat from my mitochondria, shrunk the water around my mitochondria, brought the respiratory proteins closer together, and had to eat less food. That's how it works, okay? Once you become a mitochondriac, once you understand the physics of organisms, your understanding of how things really work in us change. You don't have to believe it. I'm cool with that. But here was my problem. I'm from New York City. That's my hometown. Take a look. That's at nighttime. That's 11 o'clock at night. That's what I do for a living. I put together spines that are dislocated after car wrecks. And guess when that shit happens? Not at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? That was my problem. I realized immediately that my job and my lifestyle were bringing me into an area. And for those of you who don't know, neurosurgery residency, 7 years of doing this. I've been doing this for 27 years. Guess what I did? I ruined my mitochondria. Completely ruined them. So what have I been doing the last 12? I'm a mitochondriac. Everything I can possibly do to fix mitochondria is the key. This is for you. This is for you to realize. This is the big thing. Last year when Dave invited me here, Magda Havas was sitting in the front row and I made a controversial statement then, and I'll say it again. Blue light is the biggest worry, biggest non-native EMF we have. There's others, but right now it's still blue light. Do I think in the next 18 months it's going to change to 5G? I do. Again, a talk for another day. But you need to understand this. Porphyrins are the retinal receptors. We're coming close to the end, but this is really important for you to understand. You know that there's this huge disease out now. Number one cause of blindness in North America is AMD. This is the optic nerve. There's those vessels I showed you before. There's the fovea. That is a hole in the fovea. That's what AMD looks like under a microscope. And AMD, for those of you who don't know, is acute macular degeneration. It makes you go blind. Okay? What's changed? Cathode ray TVs, now LEDs. In case you don't know, LEDs, right there, folks. Does that look like the sun? No, not even close. I never saw a case of AMD when I was a resident. I finished my residency in 1999. I want you to think about that for a minute. We got a couple other doctors here that they could probably tell you what they've seen. The key is you have to have balanced AM light. AM light is absolutely critical. Here's the point. Look at these spectrums. You don't even have to know the numbers. Does any of these look correct? This is what you're optimized to. 4.5 billion years of evolutionary history. Right there, take a look. And we have changed it since 1879. And we think there's no biologic toll. That is what we're getting. You know what I consider Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and Huntington's? That's it, right there. That's it. That's where we're headed. We're headed off a cliff and we don't realize it. And it's so obvious when you see the mitochondrial diseases. So what happened in the last 12 years? See, 12 years ago, Jack was crazy. 7 years ago, the paleo guys told me I was crazy. The food guys still think I'm crazy. So what showed up in the literature? Blue light affects the circadian oscillator in the eye. Okay. Oh, color entrains the mammalian clock. Oh, Jack's getting less crazy. Oh, look at this one. LED lights have links to the eye. Shocker. Look at that. Artificial light that's made causes a problem with sleep. Can you imagine that? Here's the big one. This is the one I told you about, beta endorphin. You are designed, and this chemical, when it comes through the central retinal pathways, POMC is made in your brain by light as it slows down. Look at some of the other hormones. ACTH. Think that's important in an adrenal stress index? Damn straight. That's where cortisol comes from. That's why cortisol and melatonin are the opposite sides of that spectrum. That is a story about light. Everything is a story about light. This is really counterintuitive for people to hear the first time until you see it laid out. When I told the ophthalmologist this and gave this talk, they were floored. I pulled it from their own literature. A stupid neurosurgeon went into their ancient literature and found what was there. What did I tell you about innovation? You take things that are known and connect them in ways people haven't thought. I didn't discover shit. I'm just really curious. That book changed my life. Here's the big controller. Melatonin, you can take a look here, produced by the photoreceptors and other retinal cell types, RPE. Guess what it does? It regenerates every single cell in the retina. Melatonin is first made in your eye. Stop believing the nonsense about the pineal gland. Guess when that comes on? It comes on with Maddie's slide. The porphyrins, when light signals, as you heard in the other talk about light, when light gets changed to an electromechanical wave, the waveform, the solitons, the acoustic phonons in the blood plasma, send that signal to the superior cervical ganglion. That's what tells your pineal gland it's nighttime. The vibrations made by porphyrins from your red blood cells is what gives the signal for melatonin to be released in the pineal. That process is called molecular resonance transfer, meaning there doesn't need to be a direct connection. The connection is via light and through soliton waves in your vessels, and that's the key. So, the anterior retina to your hypothalamus is a central semiconductive circuit. This goes all the way back to Albert St. George in 1941. He's the first one that mentioned it. He won a Nobel Prize. Everybody laughed at him when he said it. Turned out, Ott found it, Holwich found it. Everything in your anterior chamber is a semiconductor. What does that mean? It absorbs light and it re-emits light. And inside that light, that signaling tells the brain exactly what to do. That's the key. This hormone everybody now knows in food circles is really important, but nobody still knows why. Well, it turns out it absorbs all this light. That's what leptin resistance functionally is. You can have leptin, but if you can't do anything with the signal, you're leptin resistant. And leptin resistance is what causes obesity. We now know all the effects of blue light. This is the artificial light that we're around here. Causes all these things. Take a look at them. Every single one. Notice that obesity is on the list. See, Jack's no longer crazy because now it's well known in the literature it's associated with obesity. But I got a big one coming for you. That semiconductive pathway, this is the keys. Red's got to balance blue. Neuropsin absorbing the UVA, then melanopsin at nighttime. But Ruben told you, you must block blue when the sun sets. You must get UVA and infrared A light through your eye and on your skin every morning. If you don't do it, you fail. That is your practice. You must do it. And if you don't, then you're going to suffer the consequences. Don't believe me? AM light is different. Notice the difference here. See the color temperature of sunlight when it rises is 1800 Kelvin. Look at what it's at sunset. Notice this blue scale. It's mostly red, but the light is bluer as the day goes on. Why? That's when melanopsin works, because what does it pay attention to? 435 to 465 light, which is blue. That's what the signal is. And you want to know the key? Right here at noon, 5,750 Kelvin. Do you know what your computer screen is at home 24/7? 5,750 Kelvin. Some of the newer screens, 6,500. So every time you turn the damn computer on, it's noon to your brain. For those of you who don't believe me, all the kids that have cell phones, 5 years ago I did a hack in my office on a whole bunch of kids Matt's age, and this is a long time ago, 150 times per day they look at a cell phone. 150 times per day, that means they're getting a signal that it's noon. For those of you who don't think this is a big deal, when I mentioned this to the paleo guys about 7 years ago, they laughed. The astronauts that go in the International Space Center see the sunrise and sunset 19 times in a day. You want to know why they all come back and they age faster? What happens if you're doing it 150 times a day and you're not going in the sun? Do you think that you can get kids at 25 years old that come in with carotid dissections because they have carotid disease? Why are all these diseases seemingly coming out of nowhere? Guess why? Light. How many times have I mentioned food? This is the key, folks. Blue light that's man-made is absolutely destroying us, and it affects the way your mitochondria can handle electrons from food. That's where the food story comes in, because the more those respiratory proteins get stretched out, it doesn't matter what you eat. You're gonna have a problem. You have to shrink those respiratory proteins closer together so they can do what they do. Now, this is a really interesting paper. There's two types of blue light hazard that I want to go over with you. One is the rhodopsin mediated, and then there's a lipfusin mediated. Both of these are important, but this one I want to highlight because I know Chris has spoke here. Chris wrote an excellent paper for Western A. Price. I don't remember how long ago it was, but he talked about vitamin A, its link in the eye to opsins and also to obesity. This is the path where it goes. When blue light comes in, what happens? Retinol separates from the receptor, the opsin protein, then has to be recycled. What happens when there's too much high energy blue? It cannot recycle fast enough, so vitamin A drops. That's why vitamin A is always linked, not causal, but it's always linked in some way, a correlative link to obesity and most mitochondrial diseases. That's the key. And that's the take home that I want you guys to understand. And the reason why blue is an issue, vitamin A is yellow in color. It's a complementary color. So what does that mean? That means that blue light in AM sunlight is incredibly important to your vitamin A cycle. That's the reason why it's important, because blue light's what makes vitamin A in your brain. Here's the action spectrum for the blue light hazard. You can see, starts at 400, but the peak is 435 to 465. That's why all my glasses block that. That's the reason why I think Dave is a great guy. The fact that 2 years in a row, he bought everybody the blue blocking glasses. The sad part is, looking out in this audience, not too many of you are wearing them.
They're all gone.
Okay. What's the key? Cones regenerate at night in darkness. AMD is now explosive. It's a blue light disease. Cataracts are also explosive. The rods regenerate in daytime. Believe it or not, most of the ophthalmologists didn't even know the stuff that was on this slide. The key is AM UVA light due to molecular resonance in terms of how it's made and how it works. And AM light, the key critical parts is UVA and infrared A light to regenerate the photoreceptors. Everybody knows that UVB makes vitamin D. Not too many people know about the effect of UVA and nitric oxide, both in the mitochondria and actually on your skin. It's important. This also reduces blood pressure, okay? Visible light is mostly eye camera function. That's what most people focus in on, and that's why we know a lot about it. But here's the big one. What's the photoreceptor regeneration? I told you from that retinal picture before that it's really far apart. How does this happen? Well, I told you that red light penetrates deep into the fat layer where the arterioles are. So that means it gets down to where the arteries are. And this one is not important. This is the boson effect, the two loops that I told you about. But here's the crazy thing. When you look at this, light comes through the eye, you get the slow down effect. You know that the retina is backwards. When you look at the retina in an anatomy book, here's the optic nerve, here's the back of the eyeball. Why did God or evolution, whoever you choose to believe in, build it like this? Because it needed light to slow down more, to do what it needs to do. And guess what? When we have these diseases, you know where retinal detachments occur? Between the photoreceptor here and the RPE. That's where the blood goes. And that's why you become blind. Because all these things atrophy. All the receptors, the photoreceptors atrophy because there's no UVA and no infrared A light. So think about that the next time you put your contacts in or your sunglasses. Again, back to this one. Melatonin is what regenerates every photoreceptor in your eye. And you only make it when you have UVA and infrared A light. There's the hole again. There's the OCT. You can see how thin the fovea is. The blood vessels are down here. How does it happen? There's the picture again. Take a look. This is a picture I showed you last year. This is a chloroplast. That's hemoglobin. This is photosynthesis. They're exactly the same. What's the difference? Iron's in the middle, magnesium. Anybody want to take a guess what the difference is on a periodic table between magnesium and iron? I'll save you. Electrons. 26, 12. You know why? Plants aren't complex. They're planted into the ground to the magnetic field. Their canopies in the sun. you're designed to move across the magnetic field. So you need more electrons. By whose law? Einstein's law. It's called the photoelectric effect. Light can only interact with electrons. When you're complex, you need an atom in the middle that can absorb more light. Guess why hemoglobin absorbs 250 to 600 and cuts off? That right there. Okay? That becomes extremely important right here in your eye. Light enhanced diffusion. Infrared light, and this is what it's meant to be. There's the retinal vessel, and there's the photoreceptor. When light hits the distance, and you saw the distance in that picture I show you is really big between the vessels and the fovea. What bridges the gap? Water. Water is the perfect red light chromophore. It absorbs all the way up to 300 nanometers. So what happens when the light comes on, when that AM sunlight comes on, it changes the density of water and makes a fluid wave go there. So there you got McKissick's work from this morning coming right to you. That is a soliton type of sound wave that crashes in to the photoreceptor to help regenerate it. There's where light becomes a sound wave, what we call an electromechanical disruption. And it goes further. So what's the big difference? The velocity speed is what changes in the photoreceptors. The backward retina, told you before, it slows light down. You need the light to slow down. Everybody thinks the speed of light is constant. It is. By whose law, Josh, does that change? Isn't that Fermat's law, that it changes when the medium changes? See, we're not talking about the speed of light in space. Now we're talking about the speed of light in your tissues. It follows a guy's principle called Fermat's law. And Richard Feynman made that really important when he discussed quantum electrodynamic theory. I don't expect any of you to know it. But the reason why it's important, it's the reason why your retina is ass backwards. Again, the majority of sunlight that falls to Earth is infrared A. What did Ruben tell you why we got so interested in the quantlet of using photobiomodulation? You now know it's one of the ways that you can regenerate the photoreceptors of your eye. What if I told you that we could make the third eye in your radial artery by delivering infrared A light, because you know it penetrates right in, because I showed you a picture, didn't I? So if you're an idiot and keep using blue light, can you work around this in a certain way? The answer is you can. Turns out the retina is the key to getting energy into all the growth and metabolism pathways in your body. I know that most of you don't believe that. But I got a little bit more coming for you. We're back to the slide. Energy and mass, they're both the same. The only thing that's different is the environment they come in. This was a famous paleo book, but take a look here. It all starts with light through the eye. This is the biggest false narrative on the planet, and 99.9% of people believe it. Now you know why I don't. Now, anytime you open a book, take a look what it says. Yes, circadian rhythms do actually affect everything. Take a look at that one. The eye is a metronome for the body. These are all published. Okay, take a look at that one. It's all there. See, 12 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, nobody believed it. Because they needed to have sites and research. You know why? Because a scientist relies on that. But you know what a quantum clinician relies on? That's why me and Ruben have become good friends. We're really curious. And we're observers of reality, meaning that we look very carefully. Observations are the first key step in any science project or experiment. So I come back to this one. You learned about this one last year, then you learned about this one. The mitochondria makes the C inside of you that also captures light. Okay, and the light that it captures, according to Pollack's work, UV, and IR. It covers the entire solar spectrum. That's why life is the key. And why I told you before that around every protein, you have a hydration shell. That hydration shell, the reason why zinc and copper are important in enzyme function is because when light hits it, it makes a redox pile. The redox pile makes those free electrons. Those electrons change the density of water. That's actually what makes the protein work. It's not the mineral. The mineral affects water, and water is what drives the process. If you don't believe me, there's studies out there that now show that water around the ATPase makes the ATPase 100% efficient in red light. Find me any other engine on this planet that can do that. And you know what they also found? When they remove the water from it, it's not efficient at all. So what's really important, folks? These are all things designed to make you realize things that you've missed. And just so you know, this happened 650 million years ago. We covered this last year. This happened at the Cambrian explosion when all complex life came. Guess what happens? Energy flow through plants and animals is through chloroplast and mitochondria that both came from a symbiotic bacteria. And we changed this bacteria. It only works with oxygen versus the other prokaryotes that are on the planet. But what does it absorb? This absorbs UV light all the way up to 650. This one is optimized for blue-green light. The reason why they're coupled is through this chemistry, photochemistry. And this is the key. Your future is totally tied. This is Doug Wallace 101. When you become a mitochondriac, you realize your sixth sense is your mitochondria. It pays attention to every electromagnetic wave that's present in your environment, and it makes the adjustments. You heard from Ruben and some of the other speakers about Fritz Pop. Every cell in your body at night is designed to release extreme low-frequency UV light. It's no longer conjecture, it's now been proven. So don't you think that would be important when melatonin gets released at night? What did I tell you about UV light and melatonin? Yeah, we can do some pretty amazing things when you look into it. There's the proof. It's out there. Roland Van Wyck's book, what Ruben showed you, that's another book that was on my banner earlier. Low dopamine. And here's the key. We're getting very close to the end. I said to you in the beginning, do you believe that obesity could be caused in the eye? And I told you in the beginning that most of you wouldn't believe me till I got close to the end. Well, what happens when you have a low dopamine state, the choroid in the back where the RPE is, the first thing that happens when it loses light energy, it gets thicker. I want you to notice what that says. 2017, the first change that occurs in childhood obesity is thickening of the choroid plexus in the human retina. So how freaking crazy am I now? Tell me. Is it that maybe we've not understood light, water, and magnetism to the degree that we need to? My advice to you is I think that's true. And you probably now know why I have a big disdain for a lot of modern research, because it's all manufactured and it's not tied to observations. Just so you know, every nutrition study ever done on this planet has been done under blue light. So you still believe everything you believe about food. Now you see why I had the perspective I had 7 years ago. I don't believe a damn thing in the food literature. But you know who I do believe? I believe Western A. Price. You know who else I believe? I believe Albert Schweitzer. You know why? They observed humans in their natural environment. That was the key to their observations, and to this day, this foundation still doesn't really appreciate what that brilliant dentist really found. So maybe it's going to take another dentist to wake you up. Here's the blue light guidelines. You can see right around 435 to 465. So when you leave here, if you believe anything what I told you, you go to the eye doctor and get glasses to block that at night. Every morning you get up and you make like the Sphinx. That's my practical take-homes from the whole talk. That's all you need to do. See, the hippo and the lion doesn't need to learn how to eat, neither do you. And the only reason you believe you need to learn how to eat is because you have this thing in your head that allows you to break the laws of nature. That is the key problem. Start there and innovate your way back, and I think you'll surprise yourself. You have this. It's well known. All the things that are tied to blue light, they're out there. You don't need me to tell you. This is what happens when you have too much blue light. Your pupil gets big and you die. Okay? And you usually die first of diseases that cause the respiratory proteins to shrink out. That's Doug Wallace 101. Why? Electron chain transport slows. What happens when we give a human cyanide? Same thing, except they die right away. Well, all that's changed here is the time scale. Here's the problem, folks. I want you to read it and weep. I know Dave's been on my case. Can I live in Vermont really good? Dave, you can, because you're doing good. But if you got AMD, dementia, and this and that, you've got to move to a higher quantum yield environment and get that AM light to save your ass through your eye and your skin. And you need to get naked, as much more naked as you can get. So how does this all work? Doug Wallace, he's at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He's the world expert mitochondriac as far as I'm concerned. Maddie actually went down and met him. But what happens? The solar EMF comes in, releases calcium, goes through nitric oxide, and then you make these free radicals. This is the entire pathway of how all EMF works. The problem is we're optimized to solar EMF, not non-native EMF. When that happens, it changes the electron spins of these free radicals, and they do things differently than they normally would do in the cell, and that's why we get sick from the use of cell phones and electromagnetic devices, which is what I told Mag to have this last year, why you would never catch me using a pulsed electromagnetic anything around my body. Now, Doug Wallace's lab, I just want you to pay attention right here. The position, the geometry of what's present in a mitochondria is 100% tied to energy generation. So what did I say to you earlier? The respiratory proteins have to come closer together. When that happens, these IMJs spike up, and guess what happens? You make a shit ton of energy. You know what happens when you make a lot of energy in a mitochondria? The nuclear genome gets turned off. In other words, it never gets turned on. You can't get cancer. So am I going as far to say that cancer is an epigenetic disease of light? Yep, that's what I'm saying. Ruben showed you this, so I don't have to show it to you. This is Michael Crawford's paper, huge. You got to focus on the eye clock, not the camera. My brother from another mother. That's why I really wanted him to come here to talk about this, so I decided to morph my talk so that you would get a little bit of Alexander and a little bit of Jack. Because in my opinion, he's leading the way, and I'm following behind, putting everything together. And it's incredibly important for you guys to understand it. And I've been cleared to show you this picture. So I had a lot of ladies come up to me last year and say, look, your talk kind of blew me away, and I was really interested in it. But how's it going to work for me? I'm postmenopausal, I'm getting fat, my body's changing. So I happen to sleep with a skeptic. Her name is Sandry Kruse. That was my wife, the same time you saw me. I want you to know this thing, pink and sunglasses, okay? For 7 years, my wife didn't listen to me. I changed my son, and I changed me. I changed other members in our family. She didn't believe me until one day when I went and had the locksmith come over, lock her out of the house with my daughter, and said, until you get the message, I'm done. Now let me tell you why I did it. This is the important part. I said, Sandy, if you want to kill yourself, I'm cool with it. You know what I'm not cool with? My daughter has your mitochondrial DNA. And she, at the time, was 12 years old. I said, if you don't fix this, she's going to have a big problem. You want to know why me and Ruben? Why we're friends. He's got the same issue. It took me doing this to my wife for her to get the message. I wasn't trying to force her to do something. I was trying to tell her it was the key to fixing my daughter. So, thing I'm most proud of, I got my wife to take her damn clothes off. I got my wife to take her sunglasses off. And I'm happy to tell you that is my wife at 58 years old, 2 weeks ago, with her same friend. That is my wife 1 week ago at a horse show. Notice, she is in better shape than she was in high school. So when a postmenopausal, Western A price, granola-eating woman comes up to me and tells me that it's not possible, I'm telling you, you're not getting naked enough and you're not getting out in the sun enough. And just so you guys know, I moved my entire family 5 years ago from a northern latitude to the 28th latitude. Why? Because it was important for my family. Why? Because I understood how light works. And I know nobody in this room really understands it that well. But my goal is to make sure that you all do. Even if you heard something that's 5 or 10%, say, hey, that's interesting, I've done my job. That's what I want you to do. I want you to see what is possible. Like last night in Unbound, the part of the story you didn't hear, Sarah's sitting there, and I'm going to bring it up. Sarah has a disease called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Most people in the States think it's bullshit. And I told her when I first met her in London during the biohack event when me and Ruben went, that if she came to Mexico at the 20th latitude and went into the cenotes and spent time in the jungle, I thought in 3 or 4 weeks that would go away. You know what I told her the main problem was? The UK's power grid oscillates at 50 hertz. You know what Wallace has found in his research? Every mitochondria that burns fat. Fat burning is not a function of food. It's a function of the oscillation that's made. Oscillates at 100 hertz. 50 hertz is the second harmonic of 100. I said, Sarah, my belief is that if you come to the right place, we can fix this. Sarah showed up 3 days in the jungle. Her symptoms went away. Correct, Sarah, or not? 3 frickin' days. She's had this for 12 years in the UK. That is what a mitochondriac gets. Would I have ever come up with something like that 12 years ago? No, I was an asshole. I was Julian Battle. I would never have questioned these things back then. But now, not a day goes by that I don't learn something from somebody. And Sarah proved something to me. I thought it would take 3 or 4 weeks. The fact that it happened in 3 days, that's really good news for all of you non-believer skeptics here, because you know what that means? 4 to 7 days when you live in Vermont, going down to Playa del Carmen, gives you 6 weeks of benefit. So if you make 3 or 4 trips in the wintertime, guess what? You actually may have a solution, but you have to expose yourself. You have to get past all the society and cultural things that we do. And it's our biggest thing. You heard what I said in the movie. Do the stuff that scares the shit out of you. This scared me. You heard Ruben say a little while ago that he didn't want to talk to people about doing shamanism. I mean, Josh will tell you, we've talked. As an MD, to tell the world what I'm telling you guys, do you know how counterintuitive this is to the medical profession? But guess what? It's really hard to argue with E equals MC squared. It's really hard to argue with the 1922 Nobel Prize. It's called the photoelectric effect. And you know, my favorite part is when I talked to the ophthalmologist a couple months ago, one of them raised the question, well, this is all well and good, but we need randomized controlled clinical trials. I said, son, you're not understanding. The laws of nature are not subject to man's beliefs. They're not subject to man's experiments. It's a pretty powerful statement. And you may think it's, I should say, obnoxious. I don't think it is, based on what I showed you. Why? Because now there's researchers out there showing you that it really does begin in the eye and in the skin. That's how leptin and all this is linked. And the cool thing about this, my prescription doesn't cost you a goddamn thing. And what did Einstein say? In the end, the answer will always be pretty simple. So what's my takeaway? Make like the Sphinx. Ground to the ground, take as much clothes off you can. For the ladies in the audience, there's a company in the UK, I'm putting this on Sarah. They're called Kaniki. They make bathing suits that allow UV penetration so you can be naked without naked, okay? And I can tell you, coming from the South, it's my biggest problem. I think up here in Vermont, you guys are a little bit more hippie-ish and weird, so it probably would work, but you guys don't have great quantum yield here. So the reason I mention it to you is whatever you can do to help yourself. An infrared A light can work many different ways. We came up with the Quantlet, but you can use sauna. You can use the geothermal units like that you see in Iceland. That's the reason why the Finnish and the Scandinavians always use heated pools. Why? Because they're getting part of the sunlight they don't get through heating. Remember, heat is infrared light, and we don't realize it. Okay, I'm done. Anybody have any questions? Talk in the microphone so that way.
Okay, thank you. So not only do we have to deal with the latitude in Vermont, but it's also cloudy a lot. So how does that affect our morning routine?
It's a great question. Let me finish up with her. Clouds, when it's clouds like this, you still get 31% of the light through. So the answer is it's still there. Here's the question. Number one thing in mitochondriac, what I teach people, tell me what your haplotype is, what your SNPs are, and I'll tell you if Vermont's doable for you. Because guess what? It's tied to your latitude. Well, it's simple to do. It now costs $69 to get that information. 23andMe. All you need to know is your haplotype. I need to know what your 677, 1298, your VDR receptor, your CBS. That's it. You put that on my form, and I'll tell you exactly what you're optimized to. Well, that's good. I'm Swedish and Irish too, but you know what the key is? If you have any mitochondrial diseases and you're trying to reverse them, Vermont may not be your place. But guess what? If you don't, I told you, I was able to fix my obesity with a simple, and I stayed at the same latitude at the time. I was at Nashville when I did it. But why did I relocate further south? Because I was trying to fix my wife and my daughter. And you see, 5 years. 677, 1298. Just so you guys know, these are all tied to the COMT gene and also dopamine and melatonin. That's the reason why they're all important. Because, you know, you hear all this BS from the functional medicine docs about methylation. Guess what? How you get methylation right? Sunlight. Surprise. Nathan. All right, good.
So I need some cataract surgeries. What am I going to tell an ophthalmologist?
I got 2 members going through this right now. You're in a tough spot. So one of the people is going to have custom lenses made in Germany and going to have them implanted. The ophthalmologist was okay with it. So I would tell you the key with lens repair, and this is where the Japanese ophthalmologists that I told you I spoke to, they're way ahead of us. Right now, the standard lenses in the United States all block UV. That means both A and B, and they block 50% of the blue. So what I would, I don't recommend these things because I'm not an eye doctor, but if I had to have the surgery, I would have no lens with no UV protection at all, and I would only block about 10% of the blue. The reason why, I think it's easier to block the blue with glasses, you know, at night, and it's just one of the things you have to do. But the key thing is the UVA that gets through, that 3% that gets through that I showed you how incredibly important it is for melatonin. Now, I will tell you some good news. I've got some biohackers on my forum who have had cataract surgery, and one of the things that I found, it took me a while to figure it out, that you still get UV light assimilation through your sclera of your eyes. So if you actually do a lot of sun gazing, and how I do sun gazing is different than everybody else. I don't look directly at the sun, about 15 degrees off angle, but I'll sit there 15 or 20 minutes. It actually helps. Here's the other key thing, and Ruben's probably gonna kill me when I say this, but I've got a couple ongoing hacks with people with your problem. We're using the Quantlet, because what the Quantlet does, it puts photobiomodulation, red light through your artery. Remember I told you the picture in there about regenerating the photoreceptors? I have found that if you absorb more infrared A light, you can absorb more UV light. So when you have a problem like this, it becomes a very interesting situation. Now the problem is, this is like at the edge of science. And that's what a mitochondriac or a biohacker is all about. We hack these things. Ruben hates when I talk about these things. So I would tell you, hybrid tanning is a way, and the best way to do it, Alexander Wunsch, and I'm gonna put Ruben on this. Ruben's got a good friend, and he sits on our board of Quantum Dynamics. James Carroll, he makes Thor Industry beds. These are basically like tanning beds that are nothing but red light. They give photobiomodulation. If you can find a practitioner, or say as a community here in Vermont, that you could get a booth up here, because they cost about 40 grand. But if you guys go and pay like 100 or 200 bucks a pop, then when you go outside, if you have a poor light environment, which you guys do have here, when it's present, you'll absorb even more. So that is a way to biohack Vermont, okay? I think it's a great idea, and I hope somebody in the audience says, shit, why couldn't we do that? Why couldn't we pool our money together and buy a unit, maybe talk to Tree, maybe Tree can keep it here at the farm and everybody can come here and get their 15 minutes, do it 3 times a week? Why not? I mean, let's face it, it's a farm and we're animals. The problem is most of the people in this room are zoo animals. I'm trying to turn you back into being a real animal. And I think that's something that Western A. Price actually would be behind too. All right.
Hours of daylight.
Same thing with her question. I need to know data. If I don't know the data. See, remember what I showed you in Wallace's video with the geography? Your mitochondrial haplotype is tied to your latitude. That's why mitochondrial changed. Why? Because when you live at the equator, you're L0, meaning you don't have to uncouple at all, because you need all your energy to run away from things. The further you are away, that's when you start to have more problems. And guess what? Most people in the United States come from Northern European ancestry, so we all uncouple. But one of the things that I do want to tell you, because a lot of people have talked about it today, but I want to tell you the real reason it works. CT, you heard Ruben say, is a magnetic effect, and it is because it affects water. But I'm going to tell you the number one effect that nobody ever talks about. Cold stress and heat stress release a protein in you called HSP70. HSP70 is called heat shock protein 70. And you know what it does? Its main function? It keeps the 3D architecture of proteins perfect. Remember the slide I showed you about McKissick's lecture about how light hits the protein and makes a wave, it makes a soliton? Well, the reason why cold also really works, it keeps your proteins that are misfolded or bent, which is all the neurodegenerative disorders, in better shape. So CT from neurodegenerative disorders, huge. So if you want to keep this a human brain instead of a chimpanzee brain, CT, and this is something that everybody in Vermont can do, because Lake Champlain is cold as shit. And just so you know, the target temperature is between 50 and 55 degrees, and I personally think it's okay. And if you saw the slide that I showed for Nathan and Matt, that superior cervical connector, when that goes there, that sends a signal straight to your brain. You can really change and affect the proteins in your body so that when you get little UV, like we talked about, even if it's 31%, it's still helping you, because guess what? These proteins are optimized to absorb every last little bit of light if you're there. And that's why Ruben told you guys, if you wear glasses and you're outside, this is what I do. When I'm walking on the streets in New York, the glasses down. When I need to see, I go like that. That's how I do it. You need that stimulus through your eye. Your eye is the key to your kingdom.
What about protecting the eye from the sun? I mean, all my life I've been outside in the snow and sailing and lots of reflection. Can't the eye be damaged without protection?
Absolutely. You heard what Ruben said. If you go on the equator for 12 hours a day and you're an Irish dude from Sweden, yeah. But what did I just tell you earlier? The more infrared A light you get, it protects you from UV damage. Remember the slide that I showed you about histidine and the uricanic acid? It actually works. The IRA light protects you from UV. But I still agree with you. If you have an albedo effect from the snow, there is a limit to too much. But here's the problem. We live in a world where it's too little. So do I want to spend a lot of time telling you about too much? If I was given this Western A. Price talk in Ecuador, okay. Then we need to talk. You're in Vermont. I think it's impossible. Even with snow from the albedo effect, I don't think you can get enough. Why? Because you're now a zoo animal that lives in a non-native EMF blue lit world. Your world is lit up by an alien sun. And you have to realize that technology brings us inside, not outside. And that is the key. Just think about it. There's a lot of older people here that probably have kids. I want you to think about when you and I were kids, what do? We went outside, we rode our bikes, we played baseball. What do the kids do now? They're inside, texting, playing video games. And I told you, that's 5,750 Kelvin light. That is blue light destroying DHA, ruining the eye clock, ruining their retina. And you want to know why these people are getting diabetes at 40, at 30? And it's already been shown. Type 1 and type 2 diabetes are exacerbated by blue light. Guess who told you that in my talk? Fritz Holwich, when he took the damn cataracts out. Their energy went up. What do diabetics always get? Cataracts. Now you know why. Because they're lacking sunlight and they get too much blue. And I personally believe diabetes isn't a disease of carbohydrates, it's a blue light toxic disease. That's what I believe. Anybody else has a question, come up here so I can give you the microphone because we need the... Oh, the benefit? That's a quantum mechanical answer. It's very simple. The closer two things are together, like closer two protons together, for example, if you believe the fusion model in the sun, which I will tell you I don't, anytime the protons come closer together, it makes energy transfer much easier. So the respiratory proteins need to come closer together to transfer electrons, because what is the electron transport train functionally do? It ferries electrons from cytochrome 1 all the way to the ATPase, eventually to oxygen. And oxygen accepts that terminal electron. When it gets to oxygen, it's at its ground state. When it comes into cytochrome 1, and I didn't get into all these details, but cytochrome 1 is the NAD positive NADH couple. It is a fluorophore protein that absorbs 340 nanometer light. So if you want to know why electrons from carbohydrates always enter at cytochrome 1, now you know why, because carbohydrates grow when? Long light cycles, when what kind of light's out? Purple light. So if you live in Vermont and you eat a banana on December 31st, as I famously said at a big paleo conference, you're a freaking idiot. Now you know why, because what does it do? It spreads the respiratory proteins out. When you do that, when you're not getting the stimulus of what through your eye when you do it? UVA light, because it's not present in Vermont on December 31st. Got it? That is how food electrons are affected by light stimulus through your eye and your skin. That's the circadian mismatch. That's what, everything that programs your mitochondria to work is sunlight. And that's what we're missing in the food world. And I don't have anything against food gurus. I really, truly don't. They don't understand how mitochondria work. That's the problem. And guess what? Everybody knows, there's not an argument from anybody that mitochondria are the key. They make all the energy in the cell. But the problem is when you don't understand the process in detail, this is why you always hear me say on my site, a half-truth always leads to a full lie. That's the reason why you have guys out there like Jimmy Moore who keep using social media, and he keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and he advocates ketosis for everybody. Is it working? What's he missing? You know, when you're designed to be ketotic, remember the picture that I showed you of the 4 guys eating? The last guy was skinny because he had no food in front of him. What was he in front of? The sun. What does that tell you about a guy that's always on social media tweeting and twatting and everything else? That's the problem. What did I tell you about me? My job. My job is a killer. As a neurosurgeon, I know that that's got to change. My big biohack of 2017, my members know what it is. I'm not going to share it on video, but it's tied to this issue. It's tied to this very issue. I hold myself to the same standards as everybody else. I know that it is killing me, and I've got to stop doing those things. But the key is, why do I persist? Why do I come out here? What I told you today, I figured out 12 years ago. I put this information on the internet for free. It's been on my site for 7 years. When I first put it out there, everybody said, oh, it's too hard. Nobody will understand it. Well, guess what? We're 7 years down the road. I got over 1 million people that follow me every month. And now food people are inviting me to come talk to them about light. So don't tell me shit can't change. Because you know what? If you're a true citizen scientist, you follow the data and not your beliefs. I know what the beliefs of Weston A. Price are right now. They're not the same beliefs that I think that he had back in the day. Why? I think if he would have known about light, he'd be in a mitochondriac too.
A different subject. What type of light bulbs would you say would be the best, since we live in a world where our spouses won't let you turn off all the lights?
None. I told you what I did to my wife. It took her a while, but if you're going to use a light, I think Ruben's idea of probably a red light, and it takes a while for you to get used to it, or you can use an incandescent. I will tell you to this day, the only fight that I ever have with my wife now is about light bulbs. And literally, I turn them all off. And I'm not kidding when I tell you, remember Ruben left? I don't know what the guy's name was in the movie, Millman. Remember when he said, you have to pay attention to every single thing you do, and the guy was talking about the sweatshirt coming off, and everybody laughed? I didn't laugh, because you know what? That's exactly how I'd answer your question. When you put that damn light switch on every day, you just took your respiratory proteins and done that. You know that when people come to see me with gliomas in their brain, they will spend $100,000 to live 6 extra weeks, but you think it's okay to put the light switch on and cause the same problem. That is the mindset you have to get to. So when your husband says that to you, you know what you tell him? What I said in the movie, read between the lines.
Well, how do you get around that? You go into surgery, and
Yeah.
it's light, so you're exposed to light.
I am, but what do? I do extraordinary things to offset my risk. So in other words, when people come talk to me, like my members, you got a couple of them sitting here, I would tell you, find a member who's actually been with me, like Josh and Sarah have been with me to Mexico. Why do I go to Mexico? I live at the 28th latitude. I've been to Mexico 4 times this year. So if you live here at the 50th latitude, you got a problem. And you don't realize it. And then you keep wanting to turn the damn lights on? You see what I'm saying from my perspective? How crazy that is? But think about what I said in the movie. The answer is right in front of you, and why don't you see it? Because you don't make any dopamine. I'm not kidding you. I'm being dead serious. When the dopamine levels go low, when you're faced with the answer, you're like, wait a minute. What did Ruben say? Everybody who's a biohacker wants a shortcut. You think that you can shortcut light? If you say yes, you're not part of my tribe. And I'm being honest with you. But what I'm trying to say is I want you to understand that light is fundamental. Not only is it fundamental to you and me, but it's fundamental to the food web. That was the talk from last year. If you didn't hear it, go YouTube it, because everything about food is tied to light too. All those electrons that food become are excited by light frequencies, and your mitochondria is the Rosetta Stone that deciphers that signal. And I didn't get into all those details. I gave you the surface skim. There's a lot more to this story.
Hi, just curious, from like going back to John Ott's book where he talks about the purple light and in that particular bar, does purple light straight up, does that disrupt circadian rhythm? Because I know that red kind of can.
Here, give me that. Let me answer this one first. This is a good question. For those of you who haven't read Ott's book, there's a part of the book, I forget the name of it. It was a restaurant in Chicago where he did a very interesting biohack. The thing was something about, the name of the restaurant was something seafood under the sea or something. But it was, what was it? Star of the Sea. And it was in a famous hotel in Chicago. And their shtick was they had fluorescent menus. And the only way you could see the menus, he had black lights. So here was the funny thing. Ott loved this place. He didn't know why. So he went and talked to the maitre d'. He found out that the restaurant was open for 25 years and not one person ever had a sick day. Not one. And Ott said the craziest thing, when I went to this restaurant, every time I went to Chicago, I always wanted to go back. You know why? What I just told you, dopamine. Because when you have and you're around UV light, you become euphoric. Why? Because you release what? Beta endorphin. What else? Your blood pressure goes down because UVA light, nitric oxide. It's a natural calcium channel blocker. This is what people don't get. So to answer your question, so far, and trust me, I've been hacking this because this is a great question. I have told my members that in 12 years, I have not found a biologic toll yet to UVA light at night. And I'm concerned because neuropsin is on our skin and in our eye. But if you come to my house right now, underneath where my daughter does her homework, even when it's dark, UVA light, and an incandescent. That's the only light that's allowed on in my house in December when she's doing her homework. I'll tell you how serious this is. My daughter had her Sweet 16 this December. She wanted to have the party at night. I said, fine, you can do it, but I have to be in control of the venue and everything else. So my wife goes, what the hell are you going to do? So she invites literally half the high school. I have an event hall just like this. I changed all the light bulbs out to UVA lights, and we made it a fluorescent thing. They had fluorescent balloons. You want to know the crazy thing that my daughter learned? Every single kid came back and told Callie, they slept better that night. How do you like that? So that made a huge impact on her friends, because then Callie explained to these 16-year-olds, look, this is how actually it works. My dad can actually teach this. So what started happening? Kids I would have never talked to, they start coming over and they start to see me outside. I'm at Kinnicky, and they're like, tell us about this. So they're learning, and now they all have their screens on their phone. They're actually starting to pay attention. Why? You go and ask the kids, like if Maddie was here, he's left, he will tell you, and Maddie, am I lying that all your friends in high school, they can't sleep? And this is from a kid that's in high school now. He's one of my members. I've got tons of them now. I never thought in a million years, 7 years ago when I started putting this information on the internet, that kids, when he showed up to Mexico sight unseen to hang out with me, I was like, this has got to be resonating with people. And you know the crazy thing? It's resonating with his generation more than the old farts. Because the old farts are too set in their ways to take their clothes off and go outside. Let me tell you something. The hardest thing for me to do is, I'm just telling, well, remember, this is Vermont. You need to come down south where the ladies won't go outside without their makeup on that has UV protection in it. And I'm just telling you, it is a huge problem in the South. And that's why people always ask me, why is the stroke belt and the heart attack belt in the South? It's very simple with this story. And I'll explain it to you. When it's hot outside, what do Southerners do? They go inside to air conditioning where there's no sun. What happens in the wintertime? When it goes below 50, they look like they're dressed for the tundra. So what did Rubin say? Humans never face a real winter. And it's the truth. And they never face a true summer anymore. I mean, you guys up here, you have to realize different zip codes lead to different problems. And the reason why is because the light frequencies here are different than the light frequencies in other places. And it's not just a latitude issue. I don't want you to think it is a latitude issue, because you can change your quantum yield by the clothes you wear, by the makeup you put on, by the sunglasses you wear, whether your contacts are polarized or not. And I didn't even get into all the polarization effects, how it changes the electromagnetic wave as it spins towards your retina, because it has an effect too. And that's called the Faraday effect. It's an optical magnetic effect. Trust me, girl, there's a lot of fat on this bone. People don't realize how incredibly complex light is. And until you realize it, you really will find this hard to believe.
Before you mention the type of daytime blue blocking glasses you wear, what are they called?
The lenses I have on now are Blue Tech lenses with a Blue Tech. And they have a BPI tint. If you talk to talk to Josh, or he can tell you exactly what the glasses are. You can buy them cheap. The cheapest ones you can get are on Amazon. They're Uvex glasses. They cost 10 to 15 bucks. They're plastic. They look like those old cataract glasses. They go over your glasses if you wear glasses, or you can buy the ones that Dave bought for you guys. It's not a big deal. I have these exact same glasses, same frame, except they're clear lenses. Those are the ones I wear when I'm working on the computer. Are they also called the BPI tint? No, this is the BPI tint. Those are called Blue Tech without. Blue Tech without. Yeah, without the tint.